In Transformers More Than Meets the Eye, the writer James Roberts takes up the position that Ultra Magnus never smiles. Or rather, he smiled once, way back during the early stages of the war, but hasn't smiled in the modern day. Ultra Magnus not smiling ever is a crucial character point in the character of Ultra Magnus in the More Than Meets the Eye series. Here's the problem, it's not true. We see Ultra Magnus smile before More Than Meets the Eye. We see him smile in a few years in a comic that came out before More Than Meets the Eye. Frankly, it's another case of what I think is one of the major problems of James Roberts' writing, which is ignoring canon and replacing it with whatever you want to make up. Now, they do bring up that Magnus did smile during the Battle of Hell's Point during the early war, which is another event that James Roberts brought up, made up. And everyone brings up the time Magnus smiled as this one point far, far in history, where he only smiled to a group of Decepticons that will later end up dead. But in the comics, we do see him smile. He smiles in Transformers number 18, where he's surrounded by fellow Autobots, including Ratchet and Optimus Prime. So, I wrote a fanfic about 5 years ago that was meant to reconcile the continuity error that is Ultra Magnus smiling, make it make more sense that people are referencing the time he smiled in Transformers number 18, and just sort of, if Magnus smiling is such a big deal, then I needed to make that one scene where he smiled casually make a big deal. So this is absolutely a continuity-fixing fanfic. But, here we go. It's called The Transformers, The Minimus Twinkle. The following begins in The Transformers, 2009, number 18, Revenge of the Decepticons, Part 5, Enemy Mine. Prime, Ultra Magnus said on the medical table, catching a glimpse of the red Autobot leader walk by. Magnus's concerned friend entered the medical ward, where Ratchet was attending to Bumblebee, Jetfire, Hoist, Gears, Blue Streak, and Huffer, as well as Ultra Magnus himself. Ultra Magnus, you should be conserving your energy, Prime said, approaching the duly appointed enforcer of the Tyrist Accord. I'm sorry, Ultra Magnus started. You have nothing to apologize for, old friend. You did a fine job. You made tough choices in an impossible situation, and you saved lives, Optimus Prime said, taking Ultra Magnus's hand. No, I'm sorry because I should have told you sooner, Magnus said, a smile beaming from his face. Optimus had a face of shock. Never had Magnus smiled. Once, there was a legend of Magnus smiling at the Warriors Elite during the Battle of Hell's Point, though he was shot then. Optimus didn't believe the legends, but seeing the smile on Magnus's face made him question if he was truly seeing this or not. I placed a tracking chip on Soundwave, Ultra Magnus continued, his smile receding, turning into a smirk. Hunting Decepticons down. It's what I do. Optimus put his shock aside to focus on the problem at hand, locating Megatron and his Decepticons and ending their menace to the planet once and for all. Optimus nodded at Magnus. That is truly commendable, Magnus, Prime said. Part of him was overjoyed with this revelation, but his main emotion was that of focus, a focus of ending the war with his former friend. Optimus immediately left the room to speak with the Skywatch commander Spike Witwicky on tracking down Soundwave. Ultra Magnus sighed and looked up at the ceiling. He looked down at his hand, glad that it didn't hit the lock that would have taken him and his armor to wherever Chief Justice Tyrist was, someone who Magnus hadn't heard from in a few years. Magnus then felt the online optics of everyone in the medical ward staring at him. He looked around when he realized his mistake. He smiled. Oh, Primus, Magnus sighed. Did you really just smile? Blue Streak asked in glee. Blue Streak, Magnus started. I have a picture, Ratchet said, holding a camera. What? Shouldn't you be tending to Bumblebee and the rest of your patients? Magnus said in shock. Yeah, Ratchet said, realizing how stupid and immature he was being. He went back to working on the shot, tentative Autobot leader. Hey, Ratchet, upload that image to me, will you? Blue Streak asked on his own medical table. Ratchet sighed. Magnus glared at him. Done, Ratchet said, and Magnus was enraged. Ultra Magnus doesn't smile. Delete that, Magnus ordered. Blue Streak just smiled at Magnus. Just send it over to the boys on Chemia, I know a metallurgist there who's just going to love it. He'll spread it faster than you can say records declassified, Bluestreak said happily. Nice, Hoist said quietly. Somehow, even though galactic communications had been scrambled since the surge, the entire universe was aware of the feat of Ultra Magnus's mouth within a few cycles. I regret this, Magnus sighed, and Bluestreak started laughing. Ratchet himself even started chuckling when suddenly Optimus Prime came in. Bluestreak suddenly quieted, and Ratchet once again took his stern mood as he continued repairing Bumblebee. Later that day, Megatron would be captured and imprisoned, effectively putting the war at an armistice. But that wasn't the most talked about topic. No, the entire Autobot armed forces, as well as a good portion of the Decepticons, all remembered where they were the moment Ultra Magnus smiled.